We've all heard the golden rule of surviving the night alone. Trust your gut. But what happens when your gut is screaming at you and the only thing standing between you and a psychopath is a razor blade or a sudden phone call? Tonight, we're diving into two terrifying true stories from the highways of North Carolina to the dimly lit streets of New York City, where normal nights turned into living nightmares, and a pair of blue latex gloves meant something far worse than just germ protection. I'm sharing this experience to warn anyone who finds themselves alone at night, especially at those isolated highway rest areas. This happened a few years ago in North Carolina while I was out on the road with my dad. My dad is a long-haul truck driver. I was 17 at the time, and since I was thinking about getting my CDL in a few years, I decided to tag along with him for a few days to get a feel for the job. We're from Georgia, so the drive up to North Carolina wasn't too bad. We made it up there basically on the same day we left. Our delivery was scheduled until early the next morning, around 5 a.m., so we ended up pulling into a rest area for the night somewhere around midnight. The big rig's parking lot was completely packed. There were rows and rows of big rigs, but the actual rest area building and the surrounding grounds were dead quiet. Most of the drivers had already shut off their engines and gone to sleep in their sleeper berths to prep for their early morning routes. As soon as we parked, my dad did the same. He was exhausted and went straight to sleep. I've always been a total night owl, though. Sleep wasn't happening for me anytime soon. I just sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through my phone for a couple of hours. By the time 2 a.m. rolled around, I realized I needed to use the restroom. I also grabbed my razor and a small trimmer out of my bag. I had been meaning to line up my mustache, and I figured since it was the middle of the night, the restroom would be completely empty. I'd be able to take my time, use the mirror, and not have to worry about people walking in and out. Usually, I only do that kind of grooming at home, but this felt like the perfect window. I opened the heavy truck door as quietly as I could, stepping out into the chilly night air. The entire parking lot was eerily still. The loud, buzzing hum of the highway was gone, replaced by an unsettling, heavy silence. I walked across the pavement toward the brick restroom building, which was illuminated by those harsh, buzzing amber security lights. When you walk into this specific rest area, the layout splits into two separate sections, a left side and a right side, both containing stalls and sinks. I decided to walk into the left section first. But the moment I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. I wasn't alone. Standing right there near the urinals was a man. He was just standing there, facing the wall, completely motionless. The first thing that struck me was his height. This guy was easily 6'4", maybe even taller. He had clean clothes on and a neatly trimmed beard, so he didn't look like a transient or someone out of his mind on drugs. He just looked normal, but his behavior was anything but. Trying to shake off the immediate awkwardness, I convinced myself he was just a regular traveler. I walked past him and went into one of the stalls to use the bathroom. While I was inside the stall, the silence in the room was deafening. I didn't hear him move, rustle his clothes, or clear his throat. He was just standing out there like a statue. When I finally finished, flushed, and stepped out to wash my hands at the sink, I noticed he hadn't moved an inch. He was still in the exact same spot. Just as I dried my hands and turned to leave, the man suddenly unzipped his pants and pretended to start using the urinal. It felt incredibly off. It was like he was trying to act natural, but his timing was completely wrong. My gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. I wanted to get away from him, but I still needed to fix my mustache. Hoping to shake him off, I left the left side of the restroom and walked right over to the empty right side section instead. I stood in front of the mirror, took a breath, and pulled out my razor. Not even 10 seconds later, I heard footsteps. I looked up at the mirror and my heart instantly began to race. The tall man had followed me into the right side of the restroom. There was absolutely no logical reason for him to do that. He was just on the other side. He was actively tracking me. He started walking directly toward me, my body tensed up, and right as he got within arm's reach, I raised my hand, holding my sharp razor blade firmly in my fingers. The second I did that, the man froze dead in his tracks, stopping directly behind me. Through the reflection in the mirror, I watched his face. He looked genuinely shocked. It was almost as if my sudden possession of a weapon caught him off guard, ruining whatever scenario he had mapped out in his head. I knew I couldn't panic. If I ran or showed weakness, this guy, who was easily 20 years older than me and a foot taller, could overpower me in a heartbeat. I forced myself to stay calm, looking into the mirror, and continued to line up my mustache with a shaking hand. The man then slowly backed up, walked over to a urinal on this side, and again pretended to unzip his pants. But he wasn't looking at the wall. He had his head turned completely sideways, staring directly out at me through the mirror with slow, deliberate nods. I nodded back, not because I wanted to be friendly, but because I wanted him to think I was oblivious to whatever sick game he was playing. A few seconds later, he stepped into an empty stall nearby. I glanced down at the bottom of the stall door, expecting to see him using the toilet. He wasn't. He was standing completely still in the far corner of the stall, his body pressed against the wall, staring directly out at me through the gap in the stall door with wide, unblinking eyes. The level of pure adrenaline pumping through my veins at that moment was insane. I quickly finished up, threw my things in my pocket, but kept the razor tightly clenched in my right hand. I had to walk right past his stall to get to the exit. If he lunged at me, I was fully prepared to slash him. I took a deep breath, walked past the stall with my shoulders back, and pushed open the heavy exit doors. As soon as I crossed the threshold, I noticed a security camera mounted right above the entrance. A massive wave of relief washed over me. I knew he wouldn't try anything stupid on camera. Thank God he didn't follow me out. I walked briskly back to our semi-truck, climbed into the passenger seat, and locked the door. My hands were visibly shaking. My dad was still dead asleep, snoring softly. Not knowing what else to do, I texted a close friend of mine back home and laid out everything that had just happened. About 20 minutes later, my friend replied. He told me to FaceTime him immediately. He said, "Go back to the restroom right now with your camera on. Keep me on the line, and if that creep is still there, I'll record it and call the cops." With my friend on the screen giving me a sense of backup, I swallowed my fear, grabbed my razor again, and walked back across the dark lot into the restroom. I panned the camera around, checking the stalls and the corners. The man was gone. I showed my friend exactly where the guy had been standing and how he had been staring at me. After a few minutes, we ended the call and I stepped back outside the building. But as I walked back toward the trucks, something else caught my eye. Behind the main building, there was a separate, smaller parking lot meant for regular passenger cars. It was completely pitch black, except for one single vehicle, a red sedan. Its headlights were turned on, cutting through the darkness. But the very second I turned my head to look directly at the car, the headlights instantly cut out. Everything went completely dark. Because of the distance, I couldn't see who was sitting inside the vehicle. I don't know if it was just a random traveler who had pulled in and turned off his lights, or if it was the exact same man from the restroom, sitting in the dark, watching me walk back to my truck. The timing was just too perfect. It sent a chill straight down my spine. I got back into the cab, pulled the curtains shut, and stayed awake for the rest of the night, staring at the door. Nothing else happened, and we left for our delivery at dawn. I never told my dad about that night. He's incredibly strict, and he had only recently started trusting me to go out on my own. I knew if I told him a creep had cornered me in a highway restroom at 2 a.m., he would have grounded me from ever leaving the truck again until I turned 18. The only person who knows is my friend. To this day, I still try to rationalize what that man's intentions were. He wasn't dirty, he didn't look homeless, and he didn't seem high. He was well dressed and calculated. And what scares me the most, what honestly will creep me out for the rest of my life, is wondering what would have happened if I hadn't brought that razor into the restroom with me. Ever since that night, I don't take my safety for granted anymore. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings, even in broad daylight, and you can bet I never go into a highway rest area alone after dark.
The next story. I'm a woman in my early 20s and have lived in New York City my whole life. Navigating the MTA at any hour of the day or night has always been second nature to me. I was never the type to easily get spooked. But there are two specific nights from my past that I still replay in my head all the time. For some context, my daily one-way commute from the city back to my house took about 2 hours. It involved taking 2 different trains, a 30-minute bus ride, and then a dimly lit 5-block walk home. After doing it for so many years, I usually didn't think twice about it. The first instance happened on the subway. I had just stepped onto the train right before the doors slid shut, so I decided to stay standing near them. I had my headphones in, listening to music on a lower volume. After a minute, I faintly heard something over the music. I looked up and noticed a homeless man sitting across from me, mumbling something in my direction. In New York, you see strange behavior on the subway all the time, so my immediate instinct was to just ignore it, assuming he was talking to himself. But he kept his eyes locked on me, aggressively jerking his head. Feeling uncomfortable, I pulled out one of my earbuds and quietly asked, "What did you say?" That was a huge mistake. The second I engaged, his expression turned incredibly hostile. He angrily began to insult me, screaming at the top of his lungs and calling me a bitch. My heart instantly started pounding. I still remember how hot my face and ears felt, like all the blood in my body had suddenly rushed straight to my skin. I looked around the train car, trying to make eye contact with the other passengers, silently praying that someone would acknowledge what was happening or step in. But this is New York. Nobody wanted to get involved. People looked away after a split second, staring intently at their phones or the floor. At the very next stop, even though it wasn't my station, I immediately got off the train and quickly walked into the next car over. I was desperately hoping he hadn't seen me through the windows. For the next 2 stops, I held my breath, watching the glass until I finally saw him step off the train onto a platform. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath the entire time. But that subway incident was just the prelude to the second night, which happened while I was in grad school. I had night classes that ended around 8:30 p.m., so by the time I caught my connecting bus back to my neighborhood, it was usually well after 10 p.m. Late-night bus rides always feel different. They're quieter, emptier, and much more unpredictable. Usually the drivers won't even stop unless someone pulls the cord. That night, I was listening to true horror stories on my phone during the ride. Coincidentally, the specific story I was listening to was about a woman being followed down a street. By the time the bus pulled up to my stop, the story had me feeling a bit paranoid, so I lowered my volume completely to make sure I was extra aware of my surroundings. The final leg of my commute required me to walk past a small storefronts before turning down a dark, residential dead-end street that led to my house. The lighting on that street was terrible. Most of the lampposts were completely burnt out. One of the stores I had to pass was a Popeyes. As I walked past the entrance, I started debating whether or not I wanted to grab some mac and cheese. I kept walking though, and was almost at the end of the block before I finally decided, screw it, I'm hungry. I turned completely around to head back to the store. And that's when I noticed the man. He had gotten off the same bus as me, but I hadn't paid any attention to him until that exact second. The moment I suddenly changed direction and turned around, the man literally froze dead in his tracks. He stopped walking completely. He looked wide-eyed, almost like a criminal caught red-handed. An immediate wave of unease washed over me. Trying to brush it off, I quickly walked inside the Popeyes. They were getting ready to close and barely had anything left, so I just lingered for about a minute before walking back out onto the street to head home. But when I got halfway down the block, I saw him again. He wasn't behind me anymore. He had taken a shortcut and was now standing right at the mouth of the dark dead-end street I had to turn down. He was just standing there in the shadows, waiting for me. My pace slowed down immediately. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move forward. Panicking, I pulled out my phone and called my brother. He's almost never home at that hour, so the fact that he answered on the first ring felt like an absolute miracle. I think he could hear the terror in my voice right away, because the moment I told him I was near the Popeyes, he cut me off and said, "Stay put, I'm leaving the house right now to come meet you." Knowing my brother was on the way gave me just enough courage to keep moving. I turned down the dark street, keeping my distance as I passed the man. But a second after I walked past him, I heard footsteps right behind me. The man had started walking too. He matched my pace perfectly, staying just a few feet behind me in the pitch black. Then, in a low, eerie whisper, he muttered, "I love you," followed by some other mumbled words I couldn't quite make out. I decided right then that staying on this dark street was a horrible idea.
I spun around, picked up my pace, and walked right back out to the main road where the storefronts were. I stopped right outside a nearby liquor store that was still open. There were usually a few locals hanging around there, and since I lived in the neighborhood, I scanned their faces hoping to see someone familiar. But that night, it was entirely strangers. Before I could even process what to do next, the man walked out of the dark alley and approached me. He moved uncomfortably close, repeatedly asking, "Do you need help? I can help you. Let me walk you home." I said no loudly more than once. I told him to back off. Honestly, if someone genuinely thought a person was lost and wanted to help, they would leave after being told no multiple times. But he didn't care. He kept advancing, stepping closer and closer. And that was when my eyes dropped to his hands. He was wearing blue latex surgical gloves. This was well after the pandemic had settled down. My mind immediately started racing. If this guy was so paranoid about germs, why wasn't he wearing a face mask? And it wasn't even cold outside, so there was no practical reason to wear gloves. Seeing those latex gloves made my blood run completely cold. It looked exactly like someone trying to avoid leaving fingerprints.
He started repeatedly pressuring me, saying, "You need to go home. Just go home now." He was clearly trying to force me back into that dark, unlit street where he could trap me. I refused to move away from the light of the store window. A few seconds later, the man suddenly turned and walked inside the liquor store, likely checking to see who was inside or if there were cameras. The exact moment he stepped through the door, I bolted around the corner of the block, and right there I saw my brother walking hurriedly toward me. The second I reached him, I knew the danger had passed. The entire situation outside that store probably lasted about 5 minutes at most, but it felt like hours. That's the strange thing about moments like these. Time completely slows down when you're living through a nightmare. I still wonder what that man's actual intentions were that night. Why did he follow me off the bus? And most importantly, what was up with those latex gloves in the middle of a warm night? I know one thing for sure. If my brother hadn't picked up that phone call, or if I hadn't turned back to look at that Popeyes, those latex gloves would have followed me into the pitch black of that dead-end street, and I might not be here to tell this story today. Since that night, I never wear headphones or listen to stories when I'm walking alone at night. In a city like this, being distracted for even a second can cost you everything.